Hello, St. Michael's. It's Reverend Michelle here with this week's overview for our Bible study on Amos and Hosea. And today I'm coming to you from my backyard here in Rockland County on this beautiful fall day. So you're probably hearing the sounds of wind chimes and wind in the leaves, and I think it's a leaf blower somewhere in the distance. This week we begin our study of Hosea, prophet from Israel who is speaking to Israel. Hosea is considered a problematic text by many people. And if you've read through the book, which is just a short book, really, just 14 chapters, you probably know why. The metaphor of marriage, which puts God in the role of husband and the sinful Israel in the role of wife. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let's start, as always, with context. Back to the initial split of the nation into the northern and southern kingdoms. Jeroboam the first, son of Naboth and a servant of Solomon, who was the last king of all Israel. Remember that it was Solomon's temple that was originally destroyed. Jeroboam the first was the first monarch of the northern kingdom. You may recall that I spoke about this briefly in last week's video. And you can read about the history in the book of First Kings if you're interested. In chapter 11, God told Jeroboam that he would reign over all that he desired if he only listened to all that God commanded and walked in God's ways. So here's a bit of foreshadowing for you. As you might expect, Jeroboam found himself unable to fill Yahweh's wish for his leadership because, like so many humans, he became more concerned with his own survival than with the proper worship of God. Chapter 12 in First Kings details how Jeroboam feared that the people of his kingdom might have a change of heart and return to honor the king of the southern kingdom instead of him. So that's why he decided to set up Dan, remember, that's the top of the northern kingdom, and Bethel as the places for worship in the northern kingdom. And he also commissioned the creation of two golden bulls, images depicting Baal, the Canaanite storm god of agricultural fertility. Now, Jeroboam the first reigned for 22 years, but this kind of worship didn't end with him. Apparently, all the kings after him continued this form of worship for more than 100 years and through the reigns of 8 kings, all the way up until Jehu, who destroyed these altars. In the narrative of Scripture, the failure of each of the subsequent kings after Jeroboam the first is noted as a repetition of the sins of Jeroboam the first, and the legacy of them all is a story of moral and religious failure. Definitely talk more about this next week. So about 120 years after Jeroboam's reign, his namesake took over the throne of the northern kingdom, Jeroboam the second, which, as we know, ruled during the time of Amos's visit to Israel and was still the king several years later when Hosea started to prophesy. If you recall, the northern kingdom perceived itself as quite successful in spite of Amos's analysis, but like an adult who hasn't quite grown up yet, still admires all the trophies from their high school days, Israel was still riding the glory of former years, not seeing the full extent of their issues, not able to see the writing on the wall. And that was about to change dramatically. Because although Hosea prophesied only a short time after Amos, during that short time, which is a 40-year reign of Jeroboam the second, by the time Hosea began to prophesy, Israel's situation had grown much, much worse. Assyria, and the empire to the north, which is where modern-day Iraq is, had grown in strength and regional power, and Israel's influence in the region had dwindled a lot. According to Second Kings, which tells the history of this period of time, and the prophets of Amos and Hosea, the reason for this shift in Israel's fortune was because of Israel's sins, namely their faithlessness that all started with Jeroboam the first, when his jealousy drove him to change the worship in the northern kingdom. Assyria began to make incursions into Israel until about 60 years after the reign of Jeroboam II, when Israel finally fell to Assyria, all recorded in 2 Kings. Chapter 17, it says, God removed Israel from his sight. All of this is context for the prophet Hosea. Now, as we begin our study of Hosea, let's also make note of the style. It's quite different than Amos, where we have poetic imagery and swift, damning pronouncements in a sermon-like fashion. Remember, Amos actually said, I'm no prophet, it's a way of saying, this is no skin off my nose. I'm just here because God asked me to do this. Now, in Hosea, the voice is very personal and utilizes extended metaphor in this carefully crafted accusation. Instead of a distant, detached observer in Amos, we have a deeply wounded minstrel in Hosea who holds nothing back in his telling of the pain he has been through. This is prophetic storytelling. And you'll notice the three-part arc of the story: marriage, divorce, reconciliation. The choice of metaphor for Hosea is not only painful for the subject of the story himself, but it's also become a source of pain for humanity across the ages, as Holy Scripture has so often been used by the powerful to maintain power over others. It's clear that this book has been used to bolster misogynistic structures, attitudes, and behaviors for centuries. As such, it has been part of the reason that people, especially women, cancel religion and opt out. Now, I admit to being very mixed in my view that Hosea is useful as scripture. On the one hand, it expresses something about the depth of God's love, that God would feel this kind of intense betrayal, that our relationship with God is truly that personal to God, and we actually matter that much. But on the other hand, the anthropomorphizing of God is problematic because God's relationship with us is not one to another. It's even more personal than that. God is closer than our own breath. God is the ground of our being. But mostly for me, I think regardless of how well we are able to read Hosea simply as a metaphor, the metaphor itself matters. Language matters. Why? Well, because language creates images in our mind's eye. We can't help but listen to a story, and that's what this is meant to be, Hosea. We can't help but listen to a story and create pictures in our head. Language is not neutral. It could never be. And so the language that is used for Hosea's prophecy is also not neutral, and it's not meant to be. We can also excuse it as an antiquated metaphor, I think, because as a species, we've grown more and more able to understand gender equality. But it's also clear that as a society here in America, or as a species across the world, we have not moved beyond it. Because this particular metaphor feeds the imaginations of many Christians and Jews, in particular, those Christians who subscribe to white Christian nationalism. It is for them a way of describing the God-ordained order of gender, even though that's not what Hosea himself is talking about. So you'll spend some time in your discussion this week, the subject of metaphor and the various metaphors used by Scripture for God's relationship with us, what is helpful about them, and what is unhelpful about them. Now, I hope you enjoy your study this week, and I hope to see you on Sunday as we celebrate St. Jude's Day together. Until then, bye for now.